In this video, Dr. Jordan Peterson talks about existentialism and why negative emotions are more powerful than positive emotions.
When I consider the brief span of my life, swallowed up in the eternity before and behind it, the small space that I fill or even see, engulfed in the infinite immensity of spaces which I know not, and which know not me, I am afraid, and wonder to see myself here rather than there. For there's no reason why I should be here rather than there, or now rather than then. And so that's an element of existential thinking that is shared with the phenomenologists called thrownness. And that's a term that Heidegger originated, if I remember correctly. And what it means is it's an analysis of a certain characteristic of human experience, which is that, well, there was an immense span of time in which you could have been born, but you weren't born then, you were born 20 years ago. And there was an immense span of time in the future that you could have been born, and you weren't born then either. You were born when you were born, and you're who you are, and you have exactly the characteristics that you have. And there's something tremendously arbitrary about that. It's as if you were thrown into experience, and that's what thrownness means. It means that you were randomly placed in a place and time. And there's something fundamentally irrational about that, meaning that there's no real way of understanding it. It's something you have to deal with. And you might say, well, why was I born poor? Or why was I born less attractive than I might be? Or why was I born less intelligent than I might be? Or maybe why was I born to these terrible parents at this particular horrible moment in time? And in some sense, there's no answer to questions like that. It's just how it is. And you have to deal with it. So the question is, for the existentialists, how do you deal with that? This is Walter Kaufman, if I remember, Rolomé. Rarely has the existential question been put more simply or beautifully. In this passage, we see first the profound realization of the contingency of human life, which the existentialists call thrownness. Second, we see Pascal facing unflinchingly the question of being there, or more accurately, being where. Third, we see the realization that you cannot take refuge in some superficial explanation of time and space, which Pascal, scientist that he was, could well know. And lastly, the deep shaking anxiety arising from this stark awareness of existence in such a universe. There's a fairly well-developed line of social psychological theorizing known as terror management theory. And the basic premise of terror management theory is that human beings have belief systems, and what the belief systems do is serve to protect them against death anxiety. And that's derived from the work of Ernest Becker, by the way, who wrote a great book called The Denial of Death. And his theories in The Denial of Death have been put to the test by the terror management theorists with, I would say, some success. But I think the theory is flawed because I don't believe that Becker phrased the issue properly. I think it's deeper than a fear of death, and that's what the existentialists are attempting to communicate. It's more like terror of isolated being. You know, it's not only that you're mortal, you know, that you have a border, a temporal border, you're born and you die, but also that during that time you're vulnerable to all sorts of things and all sorts of contingencies, one of which, of course, is death, but it's by no means the only one that is horrifying. I think you can certainly make a case, like the existentialists do, that the mere fact that you're limited in the face of infinite complexity is also a primary existential problem. It's a problem that human beings have been dealing with ever since they started to understand. They started to make sense of concepts that were beyond their immediate experience. And so we have this very paradoxical wiring, you might say. The unknown is partly terror, and that's the prepotent element of the unknown. So negative emotion for human beings is more powerful than positive emotion is, sort of dose for dose. And I think that's because you can be completely and utterly dead, but you can only be so much happier. And so it makes much more sense to be tilted to some degree towards sensitivity to negative emotion than it does to be tilted towards sensitivity for positive emotion. But it's also another one of those things that makes life rather intrinsically difficult, because negative emotions are commonplace and they're powerful. And they need to be, because otherwise you'd wander stupidly into something that would kill you. And it's better to be anxious than to be in pain or dead, even though it's not so good to be anxious. So for the existentialist, the fundamental quality of human existence is limitation in the face of incomprehensible complexity, and all of the things that stem from that. Existentialism is not a comprehensive philosophy or a way of life, but an endeavor to grasp reality. Existentialism is immersed in and arises directly out of man's anxiety, estrangement, and conflicts. This was written 60 years ago, and it was written, so it was aimed at Western audiences at that point. If you go back 100 years, you could make the case, or perhaps a little longer than that, you could make the case that the parts of the world that weren't Western were still reasonably well ensconced in traditional belief systems, and so those traditional belief systems provided an overarching canopy of meaning, that's one way of thinking about it, that was designed exactly to, you could say, rationalize, or you could say cope with or deal with, depending on your perspective, that existential anxiety. It gave significance to everything. It gave meaning to everything. And those are religious systems, let's say, but they came crashing down in the West in the late 1800s, and then increasingly everywhere else in the world. So the point at which we are now in time, it isn't reasonable to only consider this a pathology of the Western individual. It might even be the prime conflict that exists in the world right now between comprehensive and traditional religious systems and a modern viewpoint that has this existential angst built into it as part of its nature. Maybe it's the price you pay for increased technological mastery and awareness, but it's a big price to pay. And the existentialists were concerned about that because they also believed that although the scientific method had given us immense technological power, the worldview that came along with it, which you could say in some sense is incidental to the method, but it doesn't matter, the worldview that came along with it was sufficiently powerful and objective and reductive to blow gaping holes in the meaning systems that protected us from our existential anxiety, and to open us up to the possibility, number one, of nihilism, which is really belief in nothing, and we'll talk about that more as we progress, or a proclivity towards rational totalitarianism, which would be, you might say, the extreme reaction to the threat of nihilism and the abandonment of classic belief systems.
xa xôi, không màng về tình ái muôn nơi, sống cho là trọn kiếp đây thôi, đâu quan tâm gì chuyện đời. Thế mà lại ngâm tương tư, ông tầm bà mối xe tơ, đêm nằm trộm nhớ mơ mơ về ai. Thì ra anh yêu rồi, từ ánh mắt nụ cười, từ đôi môi gọi mưa sao xuyến lòng anh. Thì ra mê em rồi, ngày hay đêm ôm lời, chỉ nghĩ đến em thôi, đó là do anh đã yêu rồi, anh đã yêu rồi, anh đã yêu rồi. Oh, oh, anh đã yêu rồi, anh đã yêu rồi, anh đã yêu em mất rồi. Anh hay mơ mộng mình thứ xa xôi, không màng về tình ái muôn nơi, sống cho là trọn kiếp đây thôi, đâu quan tâm gì chuyện đời. Thế mà lại ngâm tương tư,